Ji-hoon, did you hear that?
Stay here. I'll check.
Something feels wrong. Ji-hoon,
What about it?
it belonged to someone who should be dead. Then who left it behind?
Korean Mafia boss's newborn daughter vanishes from a guarded estate, and the kidnapper leaves behind only one clue. Previously on the Kang family saga, Kang Ji-hoon was one of Seoul's most feared mafia bosses, a man whose silence terrified people more than most men's shouting. His wife, Amara Whitmore, was the Black American woman who married into his empire and nearly lost everything when Ji-hoon, convinced she was hiding an affair, handed her divorce papers under a hotel chandelier that had clearly seen better decisions. If you believe every mother deserves to hold her child again, hit subscribe before you go any further. Like this video if you're already praying Adaeze comes home safe. Share it with someone who can't resist a good kidnapping mystery. Only the heartless skip this one. Amara had secretly spent 2 years protecting Ji-hoon from an old blood debt left by his late father. The biggest revelation came when they discovered that Yoon Ha-rin, the man seeking repayment, was actually Madame Han's abandoned son and Ji-hoon's half-brother. After decades of buried pain and secrets, the family finally reconciled and welcomed Ha-rin home. 6 months later, Amara became pregnant, but her pregnancy revealed another dangerous family secret. Her bloodline was connected to the rival Baek family. Instead of allowing the revelation to start another war, Madame Han confessed her own past relationship with Baek Jinwoo, turning old hostility into an unexpected alliance. Amara and Ji-hoon welcomed their daughter, Adaeze, and for 4 peaceful months, the family finally believed their secrets and conflicts were behind them. Then the peace ended. 90 seconds. That's all it took for the most heavily guarded nursery in Seoul to go dark, and for a newborn girl to vanish without a single alarm, a single struggle, or a single clue, except one small, tarnished button that made her own grandmother go pale with a fear 30 years in the making. Ji-hoon had learned, over the last year, to sleep lighter than most men in his position, a habit born less from paranoia and more from the specific, exhausting vigilance of new parenthood. So when his phone buzzed at 2:47 in the morning with an alert from the nursery's security system, he was awake and moving before the second buzz finished. Probably nothing, Amara mumbled beside him, already half sitting up despite the words, because 4 months into motherhood, probably nothing had become the least trustworthy phrase in either of their vocabularies. It was not nothing. The nursery, when Ji-hoon reached it 30 seconds later, sat in a kind of silence that felt wrong in a way he couldn't immediately articulate, the specific absence of a sound he hadn't realized he'd grown used to hearing at all hours, his daughter's small, steady breathing through the baby monitor speaker. He crossed the room in 3 strides and looked down into the crib. Empty. Not disturbed. Not disrupted. Simply empty. The blanket still holding the faint indent of where his daughter had been sleeping less than an hour earlier, as though she'd been lifted out with the same careful, unhurried precision someone might use to remove a piece of art from a museum wall. Ji-hoon. Amara's voice from the doorway carried a fear he'd only heard from her once before, in an airport at 4 in the morning, except this was worse, immeasurably worse, because this time there was no folder of divorce papers to blame, no misunderstanding to untangle. Just an empty crib and a silence that had somehow gotten past 3 separate camera systems and a rotating security detail Ji-hoon had personally vetted. Check the feeds, Ji-hoon said, already moving toward the security office, his voice gone flat and clinical in the way Amara recognized from the worst version of him, the one that had spent years running an empire on precision and fear before she taught him there were softer ways to be strong. Now. The head of his security detail, a man named Choi who had served the Kang family for over a decade without a single serious incident on his record, met them in the security office already pale, already sick with the specific dread of a man whose entire professional reputation was currently collapsing in real time. The feed went dark, Choi said. 90 seconds, sir. No alarms triggered, no forced entry, no sign of struggle. Whoever did this either had inside access or technology sophisticated enough to bypass 3 redundant systems without leaving a trace. That's not possible, Ji-hoon said. I built those systems myself. I know, sir, Choi said. That's what worries me most. Madame Han arrived minutes later, summoned the way she always seemed to be, arriving before anyone had fully finished explaining the crisis to her. She took one look at the empty crib, and then at something small and metallic that Choi held out on a gloved palm, an old brass button, tarnished with age, engraved with a symbol none of them recognized. The color drained from her face so completely and so fast that Ji-hoon crossed the room to steady her before she'd even finished swaying. Mother, what is it? Madame Han stared at the button like it was a ghost that had finally, after 30 years, decided to collect on an old debt. I hoped, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, that I would never see that symbol again as long as I lived. What is it? Amara asked, fear sharpening every syllable. Madame Han looked up, and for the first time in either of their lives, Ji-hoon and Amara watched the single most composed woman either of them had ever known look unmistakably afraid. It means, she said, that a shadow this family thought was dead 30 years ago just walked into our house and took the one thing I promised myself I would protect with my life. Ji-hoon had not slept. He stood in the nursery doorway with his hands pressed flat against a frame, as if the wood might tell him something the security footage had not. The crib was empty. The blanket Amara had embroidered with Adaeze's name lay untouched, still folded at the foot, as though whoever had taken his daughter had been careful not to disturb anything else. Behind him, Amara's voice cracked through the hallway. Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon, tell me she's here. Tell me this is a mistake. He turned. He had no answer that would not break her further, so he crossed the room and pulled her into his chest, feeling her whole body shaking against him. Her hands gripped the back of his jacket, like she could hold the world still by holding him. We will find her, he said. His voice did not waver, though everything in him did. I swear it on my father's grave. On my own life. Choi appeared in the doorway, his face gray with exhaustion and something closer to shame. Sir, I have gone through every frame of footage myself, twice. There is nothing. No forced entry. No disabled cameras. It is as if he stopped himself. Say it, Ji-hoon ordered. As if the house let them in. The words landed like a blade. Amara pulled back from Ji-hoon's arms, her eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with strangers and everything to do with the people already living inside these walls. Madame Han had not left her study since dawn. When Ji-hoon finally went to her, he found her seated at her writing desk, the brass button from the nursery floor sitting in the center of a folded silk cloth in front of her, untouched, as though it might bite her if she picked it up. Mother. He shut the door behind him. You knew that symbol the moment you saw it. I want the truth. All of it. Her hands, folded in her lap, tightened until the knuckles went pale. For a long moment she said nothing, and Ji-hoon watched 30 years of silence sit heavy on her shoulders before she finally spoke. Ilwi, she said, was not destroyed. It went quiet. There is a difference, and I let myself forget it because it was easier than remembering what I did to make them go quiet in the first place. What did you do? Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time in his life, Ji-hoon saw something in his mother's face he had never seen before. Not grief. Not anger. Guilt. I made a promise to a man I betrayed, she said. And I always knew that one day, he or his blood would come to collect it. Downstairs, unnoticed by anyone in the grieving household, a member of the New Alliance staff stood at the edge of the security office, watching the brass button through the crack of a barely open door, and reached quietly for a phone that was not hers to use. The staff member's name was Adaeze, a quiet young woman who had joined the household only weeks after the Kang and Baek alliance was signed, vetted, and approved by Soo-jin herself. She kept her voice to a whisper as she spoke into the phone, her back pressed to the wall of the corridor outside the security office. The button is with the mother, she said. She recognized it. They know the name now. A voice on the other end, low and unhurried, replied only, Good. Let them be afraid a little longer. Fear makes people careless. Reyes ended the call and slipped the phone back into her sleeve, smoothing her expression into the same practiced calm she wore every day she walked these halls pretending to belong to them. She did not see Sujin standing in the shadow of the stairwell above her, having heard every word. Amara had not eaten in a day and a half. She sat at the edge of the bed she and Jihoon shared, staring at a small knitted sock that had fallen behind the nightstand weeks ago and never been found until this morning, when she'd gone looking for anything that still smelled like her daughter. Jihoon found her there, and instead of speaking, he simply sat beside her and took her hand. "When I was young," he said quietly, "my mother told me our family kept its enemies close because it was safer to watch them than to hunt them in the dark. I always thought it was wisdom. Now I wonder how many enemies she has been watching my whole life without telling me their names." Amara turned to him, her eyes rimmed red. "Jihoon, I need you to promise me something. Whatever this Ilwi is, whatever debt your mother owes them, I need you to promise that finding Adaeze matters more than protecting family secrets." "I promise," he said, and meant it with everything left in him. A knock came at the door. Sujin stood in the hallway, her expression tight with urgency she was clearly trying to control. "I need to speak with both of you," she said.
Now.
In private, they followed her to the far end of the East Wing, away from the household staff, where she finally allowed herself to exhale. "There is someone inside this house feeding information to Ilwi. I heard her myself, not 20 minutes ago, in the corridor by the security office."
Who?
Jihoon's voice had gone very still, the way it always did right before he became dangerous. "Reyes. One of the new hires." I did not recognize the voice she was speaking to, but she said the words "the mother" and "the button," and she said it like someone reporting to a handler. Sujin hesitated. "Jihoon, I know what it looks like, given my own history in this house. I know I am not the easiest person to believe right now, but I am telling you the truth." Jihoon studied her for a long moment, and Amara watched something pass between them, an old wound from the second story, now scarring into trust. "I believe you," he said finally, "because you did not have to tell me at all." Downstairs, Choi's men found Reyes in the west corridor, calmly folding linens as though she had done nothing at all that morning. When they asked her to come with them for questioning, she did not resist, did not protest, did not even look surprised. She only smiled, faintly, and said, "You're already too late.
He knows you're on to me now."
That was always the point. The linens slipped from her hands as they led her away, and in the silence that followed, Choi crouched down to look at what had fallen from the folds. A second brass button, identical to the first, with a small strip of paper tucked beneath it. He unfolded it with careful fingers. 6 words were written in a narrow, deliberate hand. "She is safe.
For now. Wait."
Madame Han was still in her study when Jihoon brought her the note. She read it twice, her lips pressed into a thin line, before she finally set it down. "This is his handwriting," she whispered. "Whose?" She looked up at her son, and for the first time, she did not try to soften what she was about to say. "A man I was supposed to marry before your father. A man I chose to betray for the sake of the Kang family name. I told myself he was dead 30 years ago." She closed her eyes. "I was wrong, and now my granddaughter is paying for my mistake." Madame Han's name was Yunhee before she became a Kang, and the man she had once promised herself to was Oh Taesung, heir to a shipping fortune that had quietly funded half the underworld along the western coast. She told Jihoon and Amara the story in pieces, her voice thinning with every sentence, as though the truth cost her something physical to release. "Taesung's family and mine had an arrangement since we were children," she said. "But when I met your father, I broke it. I broke it badly, publicly, in a way that humiliated Taesung in front of every family that mattered. He swore that day he would take something from me equal to what I had taken from him. I did not understand until now that he meant to wait as long as it took. 30 years, Jihoon said. He built Ilwi to wait 30 years. He built Ilwi to survive long enough to matter again," Madame Han corrected. "A shadow only needs to wait for the right light to fall." Amara's hands had curled into fists in her lap. "None of this tells us where my daughter is." Madame Han met her eyes, and for the first time since the kidnapping, something like resolve steadied her voice.
No.
But it tells us where to start looking. Taesung never abandoned the old shipping registry district. If he is alive, if he is behind this, he will not be able to resist keeping her close to the place where his family's name still means something. Choi assembled a small team by nightfall, 3 men Ji-hoon trusted with his life, plus Soo-jin, who insisted on coming despite Ji-hoon's objection. "I spent years inside this house pretending to be someone else," she told him flatly. "I know how people hide things in plain sight better than anyone you have on this team." He did not argue further. They moved through the old registry district after midnight, past rusted cranes and warehouses long stripped for scrap, until they reached a squat brick building at the end of the row, windows boarded, no sign of life from the outside. Choi's men found the side entrance unlocked, deliberately, and Ji-hoon felt his pulse spike at what that meant. Someone wanted them to walk in. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of dust and old paper. Rows of shipping ledgers lined the walls, untouched for decades. At the center of the room, a single lamp burned over a wooden desk, and behind it sat a thin, silver-haired man in a gray suit, his hands folded calmly in front of him. "Kang Ji-hoon," "Oh," Taesung said, his voice pleasant, almost warm. "You have your mother's eyes. It's a pity I never got to see them across a dinner table the way I once imagined I would. Where is my daughter?" Taesung did not flinch at the venom in Ji-hoon's voice. He only smiled, thin and unhurried. "Safe. Comfortable. Better cared for than you might expect from a man you consider your enemy." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit. I did not bring your family here to hurt a child, Ji-hoon. I brought you here because it is long past time your mother and I finished a conversation we started 30 years ago." Ji-hoon did not sit. "You kidnapped an infant to force a conversation." "I kidnapped an infant," Taesung said, calm and precise, "because your mother taught me long ago that this family only listens when something they love is at risk. I learned from the very best." Behind Ji-hoon, Amara stepped forward, her voice low and fierce. "I don't care about 30 years ago. I don't care what my mother-in-law did to you before I was even born. Give me back my daughter, and I promise you, whatever debt you think this family owes you, I will make sure it is paid honestly instead of through fear." For the first time, something shifted in Taesung's expression, a flicker of surprise, maybe even respect. "You must be the American wife," he said. "Yunhee's letters mentioned you. She said you had spine." He studied Amara a moment longer. "Perhaps this can be resolved with less cruelty than I originally intended." He rose from the desk and walked toward a door at the back of the room, and every heart in that building seemed to stop at once. "Bring her in," he called out. The door opened, and a woman none of them recognized stepped through, cradling a small, sleeping bundle wrapped in an unfamiliar blue blanket. Amara's knees nearly buckled. "Adaeze." Amara crossed the room before anyone could stop her, and the woman holding Adaeze did not resist as Amara's arms folded around her daughter, pulling her fully against her chest. For a moment, nothing else in the world existed. Not Taesung, not the ledgers on the walls, not 30 years of buried history. Only the small weight of her daughter, breathing, warm, alive. "She's been fed on schedule," the unfamiliar woman said quietly, almost apologetic. "Bathed.
Kept warm."
"Nothing has touched her that would not have touched her in your own nursery." Amara did not answer. She pressed her lips to the top of Adaeze's head and let the tears come freely, no longer caring who saw them. Ji-hoon's relief lasted only seconds before his eyes hardened again, fixed on Taesung. "You have her back. This is over." "It is not quite over," Taesung said, returning to his seat behind the desk with the unhurried calm of a man who had planned every second of this night. "I told you I brought you here to finish a conversation, and I meant it. Your daughter's safety was never truly in question, Ji-hoon. I am not a man who harms children, but I needed your family in this room, together, listening, and I have learned there are few motivators more effective than fear." Madame Han stepped forward for the first time since entering the building, her spine straight despite everything the night had cost her. "Then speak, Taesung." Say whatever it is you dragged an infant into the world to say. His eyes softened when he looked at her, and for a moment the calculating businessman fell away, leaving something older and more tired underneath. I do not want war, Yunhee. I never did. I built Ilwi not to destroy the Kang family, but to survive long enough to be seen by it again. 30 years, and the only time your family has ever looked in my direction is in fear. He paused. I find I do not enjoy being feared nearly as much as I imagined I would. Then what do you want?
Ji-hoon demanded.
A seat, Tae-sung said simply. Not power. Not territory. My shipping routes have sat idle for 2 decades while the Kang and Baek families divided the coast between them. I want back into the trade that was stolen from my family when your mother chose your father over our arrangement. I want it done properly, with contracts, with respect, the way the Baek alliance was done. Not with threats in the dark. I only used the dark this once, because it was the only language I was certain your family would still remember from me. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. You terrorized my wife. You put my daughter in a stranger's arms for 2 days to negotiate a business deal. Yes, Tae-sung said, without a trace of shame. And I would remind you that your own family's history is not so clean, Ji-hoon. You do not get to stand in my warehouse and lecture me about the price of power when your bloodline has paid it in worse currency than fear. The room went silent. Even Ji-hoon, for all his fury, could not argue against that. It was Madame Han who finally spoke again, her voice quiet but unshakable. You will return the child to her parents tonight, unconditionally, with no further contact between Ilwi and this family until trust is rebuilt through honest terms. If you agree to that, I will personally sit with you and negotiate shipping rights, the same as I did with the Baek family. Not because you frightened me into it, because it is time I stopped running from a debt I have owed you since I was 23 years old. Tae-sung studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Then he nodded once. Agreed. You always did know how to end a war with a single sentence, Yunhee. It is the one thing about you that never changed. He rose, gestured for the woman holding nothing now to step aside, and inclined his head toward the door. Go home. Hold your daughter. I will send word about a meeting within the week, and I will come to your territory this time, unarmed, to prove I mean what I say. They did not speak much on the drive home. Amara sat in the back seat with Adaeze curled against her chest, refusing to let go even after the child had fallen back asleep. Ji-hoon watched them both in the rearview mirror, his hands steady on the wheel now that the worst of the fear had drained out of him, replaced by something quieter and more dangerous. Resolve. Soo-jin, he said finally, I want Reyes questioned properly in the morning. I want to know everything she told them, and everything they told her to feed us. Already arranged, Soo-jin said from the passenger seat. Madame Han sat beside Amara, her eyes fixed on her granddaughter's small sleeping face, her expression unreadable in the dark. I owe you both an apology, she said softly. 30 years of silence nearly cost this family everything. Amara reached over and took her mother-in-law's hand. You brought her back to us tonight. That's what matters now. Madame Han did not answer, but her fingers tightened gently around Amara's, and for the first time since the nursery had been found empty, something in the car finally felt like peace. The house was different in the morning light, the way a place always feels different after it has nearly lost something it cannot replace. Amara sat in the nursery rocking chair with Adaeze against her shoulder, watching sunlight cross the floor in a slow gold line, and found she could not stop touching her daughter's small hands, counting each finger as though numbers alone could prove she was truly home. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway for a long while before he spoke. Choi has Reyes in the East Wing. She has been cooperative since this morning. More cooperative than I expected. What did she say? That she was recruited 8 months ago, before the wedding season even started. Tae-sung's people found her through gambling debts her brother owed in Busan. They offered to clear the debt in exchange for information, nothing more at first. Small things. Staff schedules. Security rotations. She said she did not know what the information would be used for until the night of the kidnapping itself, and by then she was too afraid to refuse. Amara looked up at him. Do you believe her? I believe fear makes people do things they would not otherwise do, Ji-hoon said quietly, glancing at his daughter. I have very little room left in me to judge anyone for that, after last night. Amara considered this, then nodded slowly. What happens to her? That is the question Soo-jin and I have been arguing about all morning. Soo-jin was waiting for them in the study. Madame Han already seated at her writing desk, the second brass button now sitting beside the first, no longer alone. Choi stood near the window, arms folded, his expression carefully neutral in the way of a man who had learned long ago not to offer opinions in this room until asked. My recommendation, Soo-jin said, once everyone had gathered, is exile, not execution. Reyes did not act out of loyalty to Ilwi. She acted out of desperation. I know something about being a person forced into a role inside this house that was never truly mine to choose. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Ji-hoon, an old understanding passing between them. If you kill everyone who is ever afraid enough to betray you, you will run out of people long before you run out of enemies. Madame Han's expression remained unreadable, but she inclined her head slightly, as though weighing the words seriously rather than dismissing them. You speak from experience. I do, Soo-jin said, without apology. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly, some of the hardness leaving his shoulders.
Exile, then.
She leaves the household today. Her brother's debt is cleared through legitimate means, so Ilwi no longer holds anything over her, and she never returns to Seoul under a Kang roof again. If she speaks of what happened here to anyone, the mercy ends. Choi nodded once, already moving toward the door to arrange it. Madame Han watched him go, then turned to her son with something like quiet pride in her tired eyes. Your father would have killed her before breakfast, and called it strength. I am not my father, Ji-hoon said simply. No, Madame Han agreed. You are better than him. I only wish I had told you that sooner. The meeting with Taesung took place 5 days later, not in the shadowed registry building but in the main hall of the Kang estate, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto a long table set with tea rather than weapons. Baek Jinwoo attended as well, at Madame Han's request, his presence a quiet reminder that old wounds in this family had healed before and could heal again. Taesung arrived precisely on time, dressed simply, no guards visible at his sides, exactly as he had promised. He bowed to Madame Han first, then to Ji-hoon, then, to everyone's mild surprise, to Amara. Mrs. Kang, he said. I owe you an apology I suspect will mean very little coming from me, but I will offer it regardless. What I did to your daughter was cruel, regardless of how safe I kept her. I let 30 years of bitterness convince me the ends justified it. I was wrong. Amara studied him for a long moment before answering. I'm not interested in whether your apology means something to me. I'm interested in whether the terms of this agreement mean my daughter never has to grow up looking over her shoulder for a man who thinks fear is a negotiating tactic. Something like respect flickered across Taesung's face again. Fair terms, then. I would expect nothing less from Yeonhee's daughter-in-law. The negotiations that followed were businesslike in a way that felt almost strange after everything that had led to this room. Shipping routes were divided along terms both fair and enforceable. Ilwi's old name was formally retired, folded quietly into a new trade partnership under Taesung's own family name, stripped of the shadow it had operated in for 3 decades. Jinwoo, watching the proceedings with the calm authority of a man who had once been an enemy himself, offered his own network as a witness and guarantor to the terms, a gesture that visibly moved Madame Han more than she allowed herself to show. When the papers were finally signed, Taesung rose from the table and turned to Madame Han one last time. I loved you once, Yeonhee, he said simply, without weight or expectation behind it, only truth. I have hated you for 30 years for the way you left, but I find, now that it's done, I don't have the appetite for hatred anymore. I think I simply wanted to matter to this family again. Foolish, for a man my age. Not foolish, Madame Han said quietly. Human. I understand that better than you might think. He nodded once, accepting the words as the closest thing to peace either of them had left to offer, and left the estate without looking back. That night, for the first time in a week, the household was quiet in a way that did not feel dangerous. Amara sat in the nursery with Ji-hoon beside her. Adaeze finally settled in her own crib, sleeping the deep, undisturbed sleep of a child too young to know how close she had come to growing up without her family whole around her. "Do you think it's really over?" Amara asked softly. Ji-hoon reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles over her knuckles, the dragon tattoos along his fingers catching faint light from the hallway. "With this family, nothing is ever fully over. But tonight, our daughter is asleep in her own crib. My mother has finally put down 30 years of guilt, and Sujin sleeps under this roof, as family rather than a threat we have to watch." He looked at her, something soft breaking through the exhaustion in his eyes. "Tonight, that is enough." Amara leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their daughter breathe steady and safe in the dark. "Tonight, that is enough," she agreed. 3 months passed, and the calm estate settled into a rhythm none of them had known was possible until they lived inside it. Adaeze grew fast the way infants do when nothing more dangerous threatens them than the ordinary business of learning to laugh, to reach for faces, to fall asleep mid-cry the moment she was lifted into familiar arms. Amara found herself measuring the good days now instead of the frightening ones, and for the first time since the wedding, there were more of the former than the latter. The formal alliance with Taesung's family had held. Shipping manifests moved cleanly along the coast under new terms, inspected and honest, none of the old shadow business Ilwi had once hidden behind. Taesung himself had visited twice since the signing, always announced, always without guards, sitting across from Madame Han in the tea room for an hour at a time in conversations no one else in the household was permitted to overhear. Whatever passed between them in those hours, Madame Han always emerged lighter than she had gone in, as though every visit unburdened her of another year she had spent carrying his ghost. "You look happy," Amara told her one afternoon, finding her in the garden with Adaeze balanced carefully on her knee, teaching her granddaughter to reach for a paper fan the way she herself had been taught as a girl. "I look like a woman who finally stopped waiting for a debt to come due," Madame Han said, and there was a lightness in her voice Amara had never heard before, not even at the wedding. "There is a particular kind of tired that only lifts once you have said the thing you spent 30 years too proud to say." Adaeze made a grab for the fan and missed, gurgling in frustration, and Madame Han laughed, low and warm, pulling her great-granddaughter close and pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. Sujin had taken to running daily security briefings alongside Choi, a partnership no one had predicted, but that worked with an efficiency the household had never had before. Where Choi saw threats in patterns and protocols, Sujin saw them in people, in the small tells of someone carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone. Between them, no gap in the estate's defenses went unnoticed twice. Reyes had not been heard from since her exile, her brother's debt cleared through channels quiet enough that no one in Busan ever learned the Kang family's hand had touched it. Ji-hoon checked on the matter once, quietly, through Choi, and confirmed only that she had left the city entirely. He did not ask further. Some mercies were meant to be left alone, once given. "Do you regret it?" Amara asked him one evening, the two of them alone on the veranda, while Madame Han put Adaeze down for the night. Letting her go instead of something harsher? Ji-hoon considered the question with the same seriousness he gave every decision that mattered. "No," he said finally. "My father built this family on the idea that fear was the only currency worth collecting. I watched what 30 years of that philosophy did to my mother. I watched it nearly cost us our daughter. I would rather build something our daughter can inherit without carrying the weight we carried to get here." Amara reached for his hand, tracing the dragon tattoo along the back of it, familiar now in a way that no longer startled her the way it once had, back when she was only beginning to understand what kind of man she had married. "That's the difference between you and him," she said. "You're building something for her to inherit. He only ever built something for people to fear." Ji-hoon turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "I learned that from you, you know. Long before Ilwi. Long before any of this. You never once looked at me like I was only what my family made me. You looked at me like I could still choose to be something else." "You did choose," Amara said softly. "Every single time it mattered." The season turned, And with it came the kind of quiet celebration the household had not allowed itself in months. A small gathering in the main hall to mark Adaeze's first steps, taken clumsily but fearlessly across the polished floor toward her father's outstretched hands. Baek Jin-woo attended with Soo-jin at his side, the old rivalry between their families now so thoroughly folded into alliance that Jin-woo had taken to bringing small gifts for Adaeze every visit, a habit Madame Han teased him for mercilessly and which he endured with visible fondness. Even Taesung sent a gift that week, arriving without a note, a small wooden ship carved with more care than business correspondence usually carried. Madame Han held it a long while before setting it gently on the mantel, where it remained, a quiet symbol of a debt finally settled honestly instead of through fear. "She has your stubbornness," Madame Han said, watching Adaeze take 3 unsteady steps before landing safely in Ji-hoon's arms, delighted with herself in the particular way of children too young to know they had done anything remarkable at all. "She has her mother's spine," Ji-hoon corrected, lifting his daughter high enough to make her shriek with laughter, the sound filling the hall in a way that felt, finally, like the house had exhaled after holding its breath for months. Amara watched them both, her husband and her daughter, framed in the golden light of late afternoon, and thought of everything it had taken to arrive at this particular, ordinary, precious moment. A false accusation of affair, a hidden blood debt, a pregnancy kept secret out of fear, a daughter stolen from her crib by a ghost from a war none of them had known they were still fighting. Through all of it, this family had chosen, again and again, honesty over silence, mercy over cruelty, love over the fear that had built the empire around them in the first place. It was not the family she had imagined marrying into, all those years ago in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. It was better. Harder won and better for it. "Mama," Adaeze said, reaching for her, the first clear word she had ever spoken, and the entire hall went still with the weight of hearing it. Amara crossed the room and took her daughter into her arms, tears she did not try to hide slipping freely down her face, and Ji-hoon wrapped his arms around them both, his forehead resting against his wife's temple. "Home," Madame Han said quietly, watching them from her chair by the window, the wooden ship catching the last of the afternoon light on the mantel behind her. "After everything, we are finally simply home." And for the first time since the Kang family name had first been spoken with fear instead of respect, that word meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. The end.
You're officially part of the elite family. So don't forget to like, share,
And most importantly, subscribe.
We'll see you in the next story.